No.
No idea.
You know?
Who knows?
Don't know, but yeah, it's
This is a good
crowd already.
showing.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm glad to
Should we
see
start
you,
up?
Olga.
Are you ready?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, might as well.
Okay. Are your parents here? I just gotta ask, Olga.
My parents-in-law are. my
Your
parents
parents-in-law are?
my parents are in Russia, and it's they were thinking about it, but it's like 3:00 in the morning their time. So.
Oh, in Petersburg. Oh,
Yeah.
jeez. They could have gotten
Yeah.
up.
Yeah.
You want me to kick it off,
You want to
Brendan?
start up? Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. All right. Well, welcome everybody. As I said, this is a really healthy showing, so we're really excited to have you tonight. The idea behind BunkerLit is simply to bring a little bit of art and inspiration into our lives, which are obviously kind of condensed right now due to quarantine and shelter in place. So the idea is that we invite writers every week to come and join and do a brief reading and then answer some questions. And I think we're now in our 8th or 9th week, so it's really wonderful to have you. Brendan is going to handle the introduction. All I want to let you know is that after the reading, there'll be a Q&A. We do ask, just because of the way that Zoom works, if you cough or somebody says something or you sneeze, it kind of interrupts and jostles the video. So if you haven't already, just move your mouse down to the bottom left and hit the little mute mic button. And then when the reading is done, you can unmute it and we can have a little dialogue and exchange. But that'll prevent the reading from sort of getting interrupted by any sort of periphery noise. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Brendan.
Well, Olga, you might have to help me with your introduction with little bits of information, but we first met in San Francisco, I think when you were working at Narrative Magazine.
Yeah, that's right.
Through a mutual writer friend, Suzanne Rendell, and I think that was like 20 years ago, something like that.
Probably less than that, but not by much. Like,
Not
well,
by
all
much.
right, 15.
Yeah. We had coffee. Olga told me how she was raised in St. Petersburg. I went with her to a reading in a very dark cafe. I remember very distinctly that I think you helped organize. Maybe it was in association with Narrative. I don't recall, but we ended up keeping in touch, and it's been just a great pleasure watching her work grow and watching her family grow, kind of like right along pace with mine. Olga helped get me to Russia for a year, for which I will eternally be grateful. And her parents, who I guess are sleeping at the moment, Maria and Leonid, they took my wife and I for this magical eve in St. Petersburg, including this performance at the Mariinsky Theater, which was one of the best nights of our lives. It was incredible. Today, Olga lives in San Francisco on a very small street, hence my joke about the Airstream. Her most recent collection, Like Water and Other Stories, which perhaps she'll read from tonight, is, I believe, her English language debut. I think, Olga, you have 3 publications in Russian that I had the pleasure of seeing when I was in St. Petersburg with your folks. Like Water and Other Stories has been really widely reviewed, not only in the US, but all over the world. It was listed as a Forward Indies Book of the Year finalist. It received an honorable mention from Eric Hoffer Book Award. Olga's work has appeared in Scoundrel Time, Alaska Quarterly Review, Feminist Studies, Confrontation, Narrative Magazine, and elsewhere. And she's also had essays and book reviews in Lit Hub, The Believer, San Francisco Chronicle, Electric Literature, The Common. She has won San Francisco's Litquake Writing Contest, as well as the Williston Herald International Short Story Prize. And a film was actually made of one of her stories that was in the Manhattan Short Film Festival. Super cool. Today she is a consulting editor at Narrative Magazine, and she co-facilitates the San Francisco Writers Workshop. I love when our families get together, when we get together, because she tolerates our mistake-ridden Russian and helps explain all the ins and outs of a country that we have all unaccountably fallen in love with. So thank you so much for being with us, Olga.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. And yeah, Brendan has been to Russia a lot more recently than I have. I think you were there when the quarantine started. So, right. And so that anyway,
That's right.
there's
We have
so
to scramble
many,
back. Yeah.
yeah, so many interesting stories. And yeah, my dad was visiting here when the quarantine started, so he had to fly back. And anyway, yeah, so I've been thinking a lot what to read tonight, because some of my latest stories I've already started writing about the quarantine, and it's sort of since this is this is the one topic that's on everyone's mind. It feels sometimes odd to be thinking of something else and of different things. I did decide to read from my book, like Water and Other Stories, in part because I know that a lot of you have read it, but some of you haven't, possibly, and also it's it's interesting oh, sorry. It's interesting sometimes, or often, for me to think back to to the experiences of the past and just look for things that we can take away from the past for the current moment. And I read a lot about the breakup of the Soviet Union, and there are no immediate parallels or immediate takeaways, but it is interesting to think of what one has lived through in one's life. For me, the breakup of the Soviet Union is the one big topic that I do come back to a lot, because I was a teen during that time, and so the disappearing of the country became the foundation on which I'm trying to build my adult life. So I'll read one of those stories. It's called The Swallow. And it said circa in 2008. That's not fully apparent here. I mean, there are two settings there. It's said between 19 and it's told from 2008, about 1992. All right. So yeah, The Swallow. Take this man, Stepan. He survived the winter of 1992 without heat or running water in his grandfather's apartment in downtown Yerevan. What a feat of entrepreneurship and ingenuity. He bought a wood-burning stove at a time when others still counted on having electricity through the winter. And the things he fed into it, and the way he tells it. There he sits now, in a fully Chekhovian setting on the terrace of my parents' house on the outskirts of Moscow, his eagle brow and crooked nose looming over a flowery teacup. Outside, a powder of snow is settling on the graveled paths, and yellow leaves are stuck frozen to the frostbitten grass of the overgrown lawn. A neurotic dog, invisible behind the tall fence of our neighbor's yard, is barking at the slightest gusting of wind. Inside, we're gathered around an oval table, remnants of pasta cooked in rancid truffle oil squirming on our plates. It's tea time. Tea and an old-fashioned Napoleon tart and a fashionable and cheap yogurt cake and a dish of raw California almonds and another dish of sugary Armenian dates. Stepan has monopolized the conversation for the evening, and we're generally a loud bunch, talkative, not very good at listening. One time, Stepan burned 60 hockey sticks in his wood-burning stove. See, Armenians don't play much hockey. It's not one of the traditional sports there. But the Soviet Union had a plan. And the plan involved selling so many hockey sticks at each sporting goods store for 3 rubles and 60 kopecks each. Brand name Moscow, made out of pliable, fine-grained wood, yew or birch. They burned long and hot and gave off a pleasant aroma to boot. America, America. Stepan echoes Irina, Olga, and Masha, the three sisters who whiled their lives away in the provinces, dreaming of Moscow. To Moscow, they cried, to Moscow. My father is anxious to break into song. Tsitsernak, or swallow, the one Armenian song he knows in Russian translation. Oh, swallow, at what an unfathomable height you're flying, and what is the direction of your flight? My aunt is growing purple with the unexpressed and inexpressible anger about the future of the world in general and of us children in particular. She's giving me the eye because I'm the youngest and I'm supposed to clear away the pasta dishes to make room for dessert plates. But how can I leave the table? Stepan's deep, mellow voice soars in my heart. One time, he sawed off a part of a wooden crossbeam in the ceiling of an old school slated for demolition. He'd climbed to the attic with a power saw and sawed the floor right underneath his feet. While he and his friends struggled to carry the beam back to the wood-burning stove, a band of competitive entrepreneurs stole Stepan's saw. Tsitsernak, tsitsernak, dugarnan tsirunterchnak. Oh, dear swallow, won't you fly to my native land where my aging mother is waiting for me? Stepan refuses a drink of cognac. He prefers tea and asks me if he can buy an electric motor for his boat in America. I have been to America and back, but I don't know a thing about electric motors. Stepan is sure he can. I don't disagree. One time, Stepan burned aluminum shavings in his wood-burning stove. The crossbeam lasted a long time, but the winter lasted longer, so he and his friends went to an abandoned factory and brought back a bag full of aluminum shavings. They heated them up in the stove, but you can't ignite aluminum at a wood-burning temperature. Luckily, Stepan's grandfather had been a chemist, and there was still a hefty supply of bomb stuffing in the house. Stepan put on heat-resistant goggles and gloves and used a magnesium stick to light the aluminum. And light it he did. But then the stove started sweating and sparking from the outside. Dear swallow, won't you fly to my mother's house, and won't you build a nest underneath her window? Stepan's brother, Tigran, is smoking on the porch outside and talking to my brother. Tigran has left his wife and needs a place to stay. But Moscow real estate prices. Tigran is an artist, a painter. He and my brother have been friends from art school. Stepan asks us to imagine the scene. Snow-covered Yerevan, sleeping underneath the stars in its valley in the shadow of Mount Ararat. Owing to the unplanned collapse of the centrally planned economy, there is no industry of any kind. People wearing layers of clothing huddle in their beds and stare at the Milky Way for the first time in decades, unmarred by the fumes from the Yerevan electrotechnical factory, cognac factory, tobacco factory, confectionery and macaroni factory, shoe factory, and aluminum factory. And in the center of this primordial quietude, from the smokestack sticking out of the window on the third floor of an apartment block in the middle of the city, the white smoke is billowing upward. What a sight. The aluminum gave the stove a good cleaning. It was white on the inside afterward. Stepan never tried any lighter heavy metals ever again, but invented a way of burning wood shavings. Usually they burn up too fast and give too little heat to matter. So he mixed them in a vat with a bit of water and some polyvinyl acetate, carpenter's glue. Then he disassembled his stove, He took the top off, laid the bottom with newspapers, and put a piece of pipe in the middle. Then he poured his wood shaving mix around it and let it rest for a few hours. When the mix hardened, he removed the pipe, lit the newspaper, and burned the wood. The charcoals turned out good enough to boil last year's potatoes and warm the water to reconstitute dry milk for his baby daughter. My mother is aching to pull out her volume of Chekhov and start placing our gathering in perspective. My dad is quietly humming Tsitsarnak. My friend Vanya cradles a guitar in his lap and tries to pick up the intricate melody. My brother and Tigran come back from the outside looking surprisingly alike, their faces brushed by the frost, their black hair sprinkled with snow. Our neighbor's dog howls anxiously as the door closes behind them. Cousin Andrei is texting dirty love notes to his girlfriend, who is watching soccer in the next room. Stepan is telling my parents about the old boat he and Tigran are repairing, the one that still lacks a motor, because to find the right motor in the Moscow suburbs, they have to visit the junkyards and do some heavy shoveling. I ask Stepan if he wants more tea. He nods without interrupting the narration and dishes himself another slice of the Napoleon tart right onto his dirty dinner plate. I should have emigrated to America back in 1992, he says. Stepan thinks that America is a mecca for entrepreneurs. I have been to America and I don't know anything about entrepreneurship, but I don't disagree. A shot is heard in the next room. Everyone jumps. My mother reads from her book. My aunt noisily rises from the table and, not looking in my direction any longer, starts piling up dirty dishes. Pasta slides off onto the yogurt cake in the teacups everywhere. Cousin Andrei unwraps a string of pasta from the neck of a cognac bottle and refills his own and Vanya's glasses. To America, they toast. Stepan says, I was sitting in Yerevan without electricity, heat, or running water, and I decided that Moscow was closer. Tigran was in Moscow, so I went to Moscow. And what now? All we have now is an old boat without a motor. And I think I have a little time, and I'll read one more short. Hold on, I just had a.
Well, I do want to make sure we have a little time for questions.
Oh right, that's right. Sorry, yeah. Right. All right. Yeah. This is good. Yeah.
You wanna take a couple quick, because I would imagine folks have some.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can either ask questions just outright, or feel free to in that comment area you can type stuff that that also works.
I'm really happy to kick it off. Olga, I'm so curious. That was such a really wonderful reading. I'm curious sort of how that particular story took shape. Was it a sense of a character or a place? What was it for you that kind of planted the seed of what that story became?
Good question. With this story, it actually came from the voice, the narrative voice. You know, I'm sort of, I'm putting Stepan on the stage, you know, where, you know, it starts with this thing where I say, like, here's Stepan. So it's a gesture, that gesture of placing him on the stage and letting him tell the story, and then sort of describing the stage a little more. That voice allowed me to do that. Yeah, one of the things that I often struggle with is, just how to connect these inner stories to outer stories. I'm working. It's really a novella form, novella shape, and how to how connect the two is always a big question.
Thank you.
Olga, I'm curious. Actually, Olga and I talk in Twitter a lot, so this is the first time we've actually kind of met. So, but I'm curious, now that the book's been out for about a year, right? Um, are there stories that you have grown to appreciate and like more now that they've been out there for a while and you've kind of seen how people react to it? Like, has your attitude changed towards some of the stories? Like, do you have a new favorite now that you didn't expect maybe a year ago when it was published?
Good question. This is really interesting. With what's happening with that is, some of this. So there are two kinds of stories. Some of the stories are like really fairly old that I've been reading for years. And this
Right.
story, for instance, I actually haven't been reading recently. Because it's an older story, and so it's sometimes fun to come back to these really old stories. I've been reading more some of the stories so I wrote most of the book in this very short amount of time, about two years after my son was born, and a lot of the stories have to do with motherhood and being an immigrant, and they revolve more about
Right.
that theme. But yeah, I think it's right now the question, I guess, is like what for me has been like what can I read really during the pandemic, because it's like I actually have a lot of stories about sick kids in this book, but they feel a little too sad to read at the moment. I don't want to go there.
Hey.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. I have a question. I was wondering, in your book, do you see the area of Russia where the characters live as sort of influencing them or being a character in itself? And what does it mean when authors say that the setting is a character? I mean, does the setting have a character arc and change, or does it just mean the setting is really interesting and well described?
Well, that's really interesting. I guess it depends on the story, right? with this setting, like I'm setting. I have two settings, right? Yerevan and Moscow, or suburbs, of Russia. So I mean, Yerevan here has become the setting. I think I enjoyed the setting the story there because it has biblical overtones. Ararat, Mount Ararat, I think is where Noah's Ark lands. That's a story from the Bible. So it's this, so I'm working with this theme of the primordial, sort of prehistoric, like, or really pre-industrial space, or that is becoming once again becoming post-industrial, in this really creepy way. But yeah, so that's yes, I'm trying to weave several motifs of space there.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question. When you were reading that story, I really heard the humor in it, and I'm wondering, when you're writing a story, are you reading aloud to yourself, and how does hearing your own words back to yourself enter into your process, if at all?
Well, hi, Catherine, and thank you for this question. Yeah, so I've been like pretty much, well, very, very soon after, okay, at the time that I wrote the story, and since then, so for the past 15, I don't know however many years, I can't count, anymore. I've been a member of the San Francisco Writers Workshop, and I've been, you know, a lot of you have heard me talk about this group because I love it. It's a weekly group, and it's unlike most workshops. It's a mix between workshop and a reading. So you read up to 6 pages out loud, and then people give comments right away. So there's no homework, and usually it meets at a bookstore, Alley Cat Books, and we've been meeting on Zoom lately. But it's a great format because you're forced as a writer to read your work out loud to an audience. And that really, when I started going there, it really transformed my relationship with writing and with words for 2 reasons. Because I started hearing myself and what my character sounded and how it felt to talk about them, and it helped me to make them more real, like in my mind. Like I could, you know, I had to embody them, you know, and that helped a lot. And the other part is it did help a lot to you know, to hear yeah, to just have people's responses, and to know that people are listening. And it, as you know, I sort of started asking myself, like, well, what are, you know, what are the stories that I want to tell people? So anyway, it's for me, it's that it helped me to go back to this idea of writing as telling a story or being a storyteller. So that's, I guess, yeah. So and it's, you know, it's interesting because I think a lot of times my ideas actually come from a really different place. I'm not setting out to tell a story. I have usually like an intellectual question, like, what does a woman feel in this such a situation? Like if I wrote the story now, I would make probably Stepan a woman, or try to experiment with that. What would her life be in this situation have been with a small baby? Imagine, you know, your husband is, you know, is making you know, is burning aluminum in your living room, and you have a little baby, you know, in your arms. That feels like, you know, like a whole other possibility there. So it's that kind of a what if question, but then I kind of force myself to look for characters, or look for voice in which to tell the story.
I love that line, Olga, that about the crossbeam, you know, went for a long time, but winter went for longer. It was just so funny. We have one question. Maybe we can end with it. It was a really great question from Monia. Maybe you can see that down there.
Oh yeah, sure. What the end is? How often do you write past the end that you show the reader and chop it back? Ditto for the beginning. Do you know that the beginning and end from the first draft, and do you give us the lovely middle? That's a great, yeah, that is a great question. With this story, actually, yeah, I feel like that I could have, I think there's another ending here that could have been found. But, you know, with a lot of times for me, like, I think, yeah, endings are just tricky. And beginnings are less. So with this story, you know, sometimes I'm really stubborn. Like a lot of times you hear in writers workshops, a lot of times you hear this advice, you know, delete your first paragraph, you know, because or delete your first page, or delete the first 10 pages of a story, because you know, so somebody said, and there's a lot of truth to that sometimes you know, you start off somewhere else, and you need to get to the heart of the story when you write. But My process is different in that sense. Sometimes I do a lot of thinking in my head before I start writing, and I need to get to the voice. And like with this story, that line just came to me, and then I was just stubborn, and I would not like, I don't give up like my favorite lines. I try to revise the story and try to get it to work towards that first line or towards that voice. If you know, if the story tries to veer away, you know, sometimes that happen, and sometimes I, you know, like, you know, one line will give me two stories or something. But with this story, so yeah, I think the beginning was, I was not to be like, or like is has always been there, and the middle was easy because, like, you know, I knew, you know, from the beginning that like this was an escalation story, an escalation of what else could happen, what else if you would do with that stove. And then the ending was the tricky part, and I relied on Chekhov, I think, a little too much here. But you know, it's a work in progress. It's always a work in progress. I write in the artist's preface that it's always a work in progress. So.
That's really wonderful, Olga. I think that's an awesome place to kind of cap it. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you guys for tuning in to BunkerLit. We are here every Wednesday, 8 o'clock Eastern, and we hope that you'll come out again. Olga, thank you so much. It was so nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for doing this, and yeah, thank you all for being here. This is really amazing. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for inviting me, cousin.
Thanks. Thank you, Muffet. Yeah.
Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.